In this video I'm going to be working on making a bathroom cabinet, which I got started on in a previous video. I have some 18mm birch plywood here, which I'm going to use to make a cabinet to sit behind the mirror doors. I cut a workpiece to size big enough to get all of my side panels out of. And then I started marking up where I want to cut some housing joints and rebate joints. It's going to be easier to cut all of these in one go. And I'm going to be using this 5mm grooving blade in my table saw to cut the joinery, which is going to help speed things up as it removes more material than my normal blade, and it has flat teeth too. I'll leave a link to this below in the description box if you're interested. I'm going to need to cut a wider kerf in my crosscut sled, and that's not really a problem seeing as I can't think of an occasion when I've used this sled for anything other than cutting rebates and housing joints. So I'll just need to make sure I fit the same blade when I use this again in future. I set the height of the blade using a combination square. I want the cuts to be about half the thickness of the plywood, so about 9mm. And the pencil marks I made were more for guidance than accuracy, so here I'm offering up the plywood to accurately mark up where my joinery will need to be cut, and these knife marks are going to be what I line up my blade with. When I dropped it into the sled, it was a little bit tricky to see those marks because of the back fence, but I had just about enough space to see them, fortunately, and then I can start cutting, doing multiple passes to remove material. This method of using the marking knife to reference from the plywood that I'm using usually works really well for me, and this project was no exception. Nice snug joints, as you can see. I can then sand the inside faces. And then with my regular blade fitted again in the table saw, I can trim the side panels to their final width, knowing that each side panel is now going to be identical. I also ripped some more pieces down to use as my top and bottom panels and cut them to length at the miter saw. After doing some final sanding at 120 grit, I can then start adding wood glue and assembling. All of the housings were perfect, and the rebate at the top was too, but the one at the bottom was not quite right. So I've just come to gluing up the bottom shelf into the rebate, and these aren't quite flush. So when I cut this rebate joint, I guess I must have mistaken another mark for my knife mark, because this shelf needs to be about 1mm further up. If I'd have done a dry fit, I would have noticed that, but I didn't, because I'm an idiot. So I'm going to take this apart now, and I'll have to find a way to recut that joint. This is what happens when you try to take shortcuts. I removed the glue, and I can then remark up the material that needs removing here, and I did this with a chisel. None of the side panels on these units are going to be visible, so I decided to add some screws just for some extra reinforcement, mainly so that I can carry on working and I don't have to clamp this up and wait for the glue to dry. And then I sanded all the end grain. So I made two of these units which are identical, and I applied some wood glue to one of the side panels as I want these to be one big solid unit. To mount the cabinet to the wall, I bought some of these mounting brackets, which I would not recommend at all, and I'll explain why shortly. Here's how they go together. One gets mounted to the back of the cabinet, one gets mounted to the wall, and then the two interlink to give a really secure fixing. I decided where I wanted to add them, and then fixed them in place with some screws. I went for 4 at the top and 2 at the bottom. And then inside, I'm carefully measuring and figuring out where the corresponding plates would need to be fitted. I drill the holes with my STS drill, add some wall plugs, and then I can screw them in place. When I offered up the cabinet, it seemed like they would line up okay, but the plates didn't seem to lock in properly. And this is where I realised what the problem was here. So I tried bending the hooks on the brackets slightly to help them seat. But again, it really wasn't working as planned. So the problem with these brackets is that they don't have a big enough countersink to accommodate screws, even with small headed screws. You can see here that the screw head is protruding. So what's happening is that when the two brackets slide together, the heads are hitting one another. So pretty rubbish really, and that'll teach me for cheaping out on these brackets from Amazon. I decided I'd just use them in the end though, as they held well, so I just got them seated as best I could. It's just a shame they were still visible from the front really, but I can replace these another day with better quality fixings, so for now this will do. With the top part done, I can start working on a shelf at the bottom to cover up this hole where a fireplace used to be, which I uncovered in a previous video. I'm going to use some more birch ply for this, and here I'm cutting some dominoes to make a very simple L-shaped workpiece. In future I'll need to add some sort of ventilation to this too, just to make sure that air can still flow through to prevent any moisture build-up. I offered them up in situ so that I can scribe a line to determine how much the top panel will overhang the front panel. And after cutting the corresponding dominoes, I can then get it glued and clamped together. I offer it up again to scribe a line on the wall, and then I can use a piece of the same plywood to mark up the thickness of the top shelf, which I can then use as a reference line to fit a wall batten to support the back of it. And I used my SDS drill and some framing screws to secure the batten in place. I added a few blobs of grab adhesive and then drop it in place. And then I can add decorator's caulking to hide the gaps. And later on I can paint it all in. One final job for this video is to finish off this part of the cabinet. I just wanted to hide this unsightly mess at the top where there was some old ceiling tiles and coving. And I'm just going to use a thin piece of plywood, primed and painted to match, to make a cover panel which will hide that. And with this part of the cabinet done, I can start loading it up. Top shelves are great for things like deodorant and aftershave, and the larger shelves at the bottom are good for things like bottles of bleach. And that bottom shelf we can use to store toilet rolls. In the next video I'll be making some doors so that we can hide this hot water tank, and also I'll be making a threshold for the floor. And if you want to see more videos about the bathroom renovation, you can get access to those via YouTube channel membership and Patreon, as well as early access to my videos, project plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos. Links to those can be found in the description box below. Thank you for watching.